62 Max Millions. Why dream to the min?
To the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. We are brought to you by Bet Rivers. It's a whole new game. Reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review our show. I'm your host, William Liu, and today, for the first segment, I am joined by a friend of the program, Mo Dakhil of Nerder She Wrote podcast, part of the Athletic NBA podcast, and also just one of the most essential NBA Twitter follows. If you are curious about the game and want to learn more about it, Mo does a great job of breaking down film and just really explaining what's going on a basketball court, and that's exactly what we're going to do here with Mo today. So, Mo, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's opening day, Will. Like I'm pumped. Let's go.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. Happy that Draymond at least gets to play and get his ring, and you get to see the Warriors play after all this time. I know, obviously, the last performance we saw from them was like spectacular, and then of course we got all this like drama and all that stuff. But yeah, no.
What is an NBA opening day if there's not some drama somewhere?
Yeah, you're right. And yeah, definitely. I feel like the offseason is so much about drama and so much about moves that may or may not happen. And then the games actually get to be played. And I think for guys like you and me who just really love watching basketball and really love sort of like, nerding out over it, it's like finally we get to like actually focus on real things,
Oh, this is Christmas for me.
Yeah.
This is my Christmas day.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
All right. Well, Mo, listen, for the Raptors, they don't actually open tonight. They'll tip off on Wednesday with the majority of the NBA. And I think, look, heading into the season, there's been so much like preview content and sort of a lot of expectations and excitement over the Raptors, rightfully so. I think they started really strong last year in terms of just sort of like building with this current core. I think 48 wins was above what most people had them for last season. And I think that this season, a lot of fans are expecting 50-plus wins, and for good reason. But the one area of the team that's still a big concern is the offense, right? And Mo, we've had a lot of conversations last year where we talked about, Nick being really effective, really creative on the defensive end, arguably one of the best, on that front in terms of setting up defenses. But offensively, he hasn't necessarily brought as much success to the Raptors. And actually, I interviewed Nick on Sunday, and he himself actually said, he's like, look, I'm as time goes on, I'm more and more interested in figuring out ways to stop the opponent rather than coming up with tricky plays. And that's not to say that like he's not interested in offense. Obviously, he coaches both sides of the ball, but you know what? The offense for the Raptors could stand to improve. And I think, Mo, I'd love to check in with you in terms of what worked with the offense last season and sort of what didn't for the Raptors in terms of just, how we can get this offense to another level, because I think you and I probably both agree that's the limiting factor for them this season.
I mean, that's what lowers their ceiling, right? We know the defense is going to be good with everybody that they have. It's what can they do in the half court offense, because they're a great transition team, right? And that makes sense. Good defense, force turnovers, get the ball out there real quickly. Everybody flies out up the court, get easy buckets. But once it becomes a half court game, that's really where they struggle. And it's hard, Will, like when I look at it and I go back and I watch the film and things like that, I think really my ultimate question is just who's going to command a double team and this isn't a shot at anybody on the roster. It's just none of those guys, including Siakam, who I think is great, doesn't really make teams feel like I have to make sure we always send another guy to help our defenders on him. Everybody feels confident in we could switch, we can figure it out, we can do a good enough job against him. So like really the question is where do they create a mismatch?
Mm.
And that's kind of the hardest thing for them offensively. And I think that's really where the offense begins to struggle.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that because one of the takeaways I saw from just preseason, especially with the starting five that the Raptors have, is just like the way they structured their offense seemed mostly in terms of just who had the mismatch, and then we give the ball to that guy, and then we attack from there, right? Like, for example, when we saw them play Boston in preseason, I mean, Boston's not a team that has a lot of mismatches. I think that's what makes them really great defensively. One of the things, at least. But, the Raptors just basically was like, all right, whoever Derek White is guarding, we are going to attack. Or necessarily, if we want the specific matchup, we might get a screen with Derek White's guy, force him to switch, and then the ultimate goal is we're going to attack Derek White, and thinking about that as sort of the defensive mismatch that the Raptors saw on that side of the floor. So I think, to me, it's like if teams are very effective in terms of switching and sort of limiting the Raptors in terms of one-on-one offense, are there ways that you can sort of counter that, right? Because to me, I'm thinking about the ways that you got to attack switching. NBA teams nowadays, it's very, very common, as you mentioned. You'll probably see switches 1 through 4. Some teams switch 1 through 5. Like the Raptors could probably switch 2 through 5, right? Obviously, I don't think they want.
I mean, the Raptors
centers.
can switch 1 through 30. I mean,
Yeah,
it's almost besides Fred VanVleet, they're almost all the same player.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. It's like the opposite of the nesting dolls situation. But
Right.
I think, yeah, I mean, how do you attack switches, though? Because there has to be a better way than just necessarily like, okay, we've got our best offensive matchup against their weakest defensive matchup. Aren't there more things that you can do off the ball to sort of attack a switch?
Yeah, I think it's I think teams get too caught up in attacking the switch,
What do
right?
you mean by that?
You'll see plays where a team will set a screen to get a switch. They don't get the switch. Okay, they'll set another screen and get the switch. And then when they finally get the switch, now you have Pascal Siakam maybe 3 feet off the 3-point line and 6
Mm,
seconds left in the shot clock.
okay.
You spent almost all this time concerned with getting a switch that it caused put you in a bad position offensively, even though you got the matchup you wanted. You didn't give him enough time to take advantage of. I think one thing for Toronto is I think they need to just try to not worry about it so much about getting the mismatch and go about it. I think you know what, just run an offense, and I think the other issue is just they don't have a none of the stuff has a layer to it. It's one option. If that option gets taken away, it turns into one-on-one basketball, and
Mm,
that actually hasn't been fruitful for the Raptors. Looking at last season, they ranked 24th in isolation plays,
yeah.
uh, in the NBA in terms of points per possession. So I think they got to find ways to just get more of a involved offense, more of an offense similar to kind of like what the Warriors run,
Mm,
which I granted, right? They have Steph Curry.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, like great analysis, Smo. Right there.
That's why
But I
we
think
brought
it's
you
more.
on.
Yeah,
Just
right.
do what
But
the
it's
champions did.
yeah, exactly. But it's more built in
Uh-huh.
cutting, movement, and things like that. I think this squad, movement and cutting wise, I think can be one of the best teams in the NBA with that.
Hmm.
Setting screens off ball and slipping and finding opportunities there and stuff like that. I think they need to be more focused on that side of the basketball than isolation stuff. I think that's where you'll see a little bit more of their offense tick up and get going from there. Because I just don't think, and again, I just don't think they have an isolation guy that teams are afraid of.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right with that. I think the stats last year was like Gary Trent Jr. probably was the most efficient in terms of isolation plays. And, with all due respect to Gary and his isolation game, it's just like if teams really keyed in on stopping that, I don't think the numbers will be as strong, right? I think right now
Not,
what's happening is the
it's not
strongest
even that,
defenders.
Will.
Yeah.
It's not even that, Will. If I'm the opposing coaching staff and it's like the game's gonna hang in the balance on and depend on Gary Trent's
Yeah. Fair.
isolations, I'm okay with that. I
Mhm.
will live with my chances there. And again, not a shot at Gary Trent Jr., but it's not Siakam who's their best player. It's not Fred VanVleet, and it's not Scottie Barnes or OG Anunoby. Okay, I'll take my chances.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. So in terms of incorporating more cutting a ball movement, I think my thinking about this team in terms of the way they've structured their offense is like who are the connectors in that team, right? Because you have guys with the Warriors, for example, like Draymond. is a pass first, second, and third kind of guy, but he's so good at screening. He's obviously got the chemistry with Steph and Clay and even Jordan Poole. I know obviously the punch and the jokes are there, but they honestly they do a really good job of sort of using Draymond to get their shooters off the ball, moving around. I want to talk about the shooting aspect in a second, but just who are the guys in the Raptors offense that you can see making those connecting type of plays to sort of increase the sort of the unselfishness in the offense so that you don't have as much static one-on-one?
I think that's where you're kind of going to be hoping for the Scottie Barnes leap in year 2.
Okay.
And maybe and that might be unfair to put on a second year player, but they need somebody to kind of be a little bit more of a connector. And again, they have too many. This is the problem. Your defense is great because you have so many interchangeable players, but your offense is bad because you have so many interchangeable players. They all do the same thing, right?
That's what happens when you only draft defense first guys.
Right. What a conundrum to have. Like, it's really
Yeah.
a troubling dilemma, right? Like, because they all do the same thing, right? Isolation, one-on-one, let's attack the hoop,
Mhm.
get to the basket type guys. And that's great, but you need to have more versatility in your offense. And I think that's where you got to ask guys like Scottie Barnes to be like, hey, be more of a connector,
Mhm.
look to play make. Fred VanVleet, you're gonna want that from him, but it's also tough. He's a small guy. He's not really a playmaking guard as I feel like he's more of a scoring guard and such a threat to shoot.
Mhm.
You want him to kind of space a little bit. With Barnes, you can kind of get a little bit of that. Let me attack the rim and then find the kick out passes and move around like that. You know, uh Going back to the Warriors, Draymond's such a unique player in what he does offensively with his passing and screening. It's hard to say go be like Draymond.
Mm.
But you need to find a guy that can kind of be a little bit of that and
Right.
and provide some of that. And if I had to guess, I would probably look to see if Scottie Barnes is kind of that guy. We saw him kind of play almost every position last season, so it might be just more of a trust of his versatility.
Yeah, I heard this theory from David Thorpe, who's actually going to be on the second segment as well about Scottie in terms of just like the coaching staff was able to put him in all these different positions, and now they have all this data to analyze in the offseason in terms of like which ones really worked, which ones are more interesting in terms of the avenues to sort of explore and sort of specify his role a little bit. But I do agree with you. I think in the starting five, that connector probably should be Scottie. Now, I think for a lot of people, they probably want Scottie to just like initiate and do some more scoring as well. I think there's obviously a lot of hype after Rookie of the Year, and people sort of want to see him make that next jump towards, being an all-star contention. And of course, you need to put up a couple more stats to do that. I think, but naturally, he is a pass-first kind of guy, and it does make a lot of sense. I think there are probably things in terms of like working on the screening, getting him into different spots in the post, for example, where he can maybe draw a double because he is quite large. And the one thing that's really nice for the Raptors that it's kind of built into their team is that because they have 4 guys in the starting 5 and basically 5 guys coming off the bench who are all 6'9", there are size mismatches eventually where you're able to play through those and draw a double team. Scottie can kind of do that for the starting 5. Oddly enough, this might be a super deep cut in terms of Raptor fandom, but Thad Young actually plays a lot of a connecting type of role for the second unit. In fact, I think if you think about who the Raptors actually have in terms of guys who are unselfish, guys who are not necessarily concerned about their numbers, not necessarily concerned about scoring, and just look to sort of set other guys up, that is actually probably the best example of that on the team. And he has a real knack for finding a guy like Chris Boucher, who's a very natural cutter.
And I'm also going to add Otto Porter Jr. I thought that was a great pickup
Okay.
for them, but that's another guy that can kind of do that to a degree. Probably not at the level of Thad Young. I think Thad Young, which was a great call on your end of being that guy, but I think even to a lesser degree, Otto Porter can do the same thing. I
Hmm.
think again, of course, they went and picked up another 6'8" guy.
Hey,
It's
this one
kind
can
of
shoot.
just
This is different.
this
This one
one
can
can shoot.
shoot.
He played a big role for the Warriors
Mhm.
in their championship. I think that's something that people are kind of forgetting a little bit just because how good Steph was in the finals and everything. I think, he was important to that team in terms of just being able to spread the floor and another high IQ player, good cutter and all those things. I think there's going to be a lot of that kind of DNA a little bit imprinted on this team.
Right. Now, I think the other element that we touched on earlier was just the shooting. There's just not a lot of depth in shooting on this team. I actually asked, Nick, and also asked Bobby Webster about this last season about just like Is it just a thing for the team where you guys just believe that you can teach guys to shoot? Because it's not necessarily that the top priority in terms of who they get, right? Like in recent memory, they were able to swap a guy like Norm Powell for Gary Trent, who obviously his primary attribute is shooting. Um, and that's an acquisition for a shooter, but that's like a like for like kind of acquisition, right? In terms of the newer acquisitions, in terms of when you think about last year's draft of like Scottie Barnes and Delano Banton, those guys are not shooters, right? They're hoping to develop those guys into capable shooters. You look at the guys that they drafted this year, Christian Coloco, also not a shooter, who they're hoping to develop into one. Otto is kind of stands out in that front because obviously he does have that skill set. But I mean, how much of the lack of effectiveness in terms of half court shooting just comes down to the fact that they don't have a lot of like 3-point shooters?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's such a problem. And what I mean by it is it just allows teams to say like, listen, we're going to defend Fred VanVleet at the 3-point line. We're not going to let him get wide open looks.
Hmm.
But really everybody else, and Gary Trent and to a degree Thad Young, although he only shoots about less than 2 a game last season, he
Yeah,
probably needs to up his volume. You're not really gonna we're not gonna run hard at anybody else at the 3-point line.
right.
And what that does is it allows the defenses to pack the paint, which again, so now you get the switch you want. And now you're attacking. Well, when Siakam's driving into the lane, he has to go through not just his primary defender, he's got 2 other help guys there
Yeah,
waiting for him. And that's where the challenges come in, right? Now it's like, okay, I have to be amazing to get to the hoop and get to the basket or draw a foul. And you know what? Siakam's a hell of a player. He can do it a lot
yeah,
more often than not. But when you're in the deep end of the season, when you're in the playoffs, it's so much harder, and that's where the challenge comes. So the really where is the shooting is going to come from is a big question mark. Is Barnes going to make that leap as a shooter? And again, that also opens up opportunities for him driving and things
yeah.
like that. It it becomes it's worrisome. You got to start looking at it, and you got to hope like, hey, w- hopefully our development team feels confident enough, but it's hard. And there's a big difference between knocking down shots in practice, in training camp, in preseason games, and doing it when the lights are on.
Yeah.
And as you know, the lights are coming on now. Let's see. We're gonna find out if guys can do it or not.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think even just looking ahead to opening night for the Raptors on Wednesday, they're going to be playing Cleveland. That paint's going to be packed. That paint's going to be packed. Mobley will be there. Jared Allen will be there. And, of course, there are small guards, so the Raptors' wings can shoot over. I don't think I have too much of a concern about that. But, yeah, getting all up to the basket and finishing effectively is going to be a challenge against a healthy Cleveland team, defensively at least. Yeah, I think the other thing, too, for me is just thinking about role definition on the team. Because I think um, you could argue it both ways, right? Like the Raptors have 5 guys who last season in the starting 5 all averaged 15 points. I think Scottie was like 14.9, but let's just say 15 points, right?
We're gonna say 15. We're gonna
Yeah.
give him the 1 point. I'm willing to concede that.
There you go. All right, so 5 guys with 15 points. This is great. This is really reflective of like the offense's balance in a way. But when you look at it, the assist totals are actually come somewhat low. And when you actually look at sort of the way that each player sort of plays, I don't see a lot of role definition on the team. Now that might be on purpose, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that in terms of Nick just giving these guys the green light just to sort of explore who they are as players, because a lot of them are quite young. But is that something to be argued that a little bit more role definition offensively could lead to sort of more effective and more efficient outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. I think it's look when you look around the league, everybody offensively kind of has a role. You know who's the guys who are going to set the screens, roll to the basket, and things like that, and
Yep.
who's going to pop and come off ball screens and things like. Everybody kind of has their role delineation. That's a tough word for me to say. I apologize. The but it goes back to what we said about the Raptors. They're all the same player.
Mm,
They're interchangeable, which is great on one respect and a problem on the other. So a lot of these guys are all isolation guys. So now you need to figure out like, okay, can we get OG to say, hey, we want you to be primarily screening for these guys, rolling and popping, and then you could attack the second side and go from there.
mm,
It's you got to kind of set that. I think it's really important. And I think the thing that would worry me if I was a Raptor fan is what you said in the beginning when you talked about speaking with Nick Nurse. He's talking about I'm focused on the defense. Like, yeah, the defense is kind of set up at this point.
mm.
All these guys have been in the system long enough and understand it and things like that. You need to start focusing on the offense here. And that's where you need to set those roles up. And I think that's the important thing there. And that's going to really be the question of where the Raptors season goes. Last year, they were a top 10 defense. That's great. Offensively, they were 16th in the NBA.
And
And
that's offensive rebounds and transition.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And that's and this is using the cleaning the glass number. So this takes out garbage time. The you need to try to get up to being closer to just 12 and 13.
Mhm.
Just take a little bit of a leap and
Yeah.
have your defense still being that good. But that's going to take coaching. And that's concerning for me if Nick Nurse is saying, "Hey, I'm just more focused on the defense. I don't want to draw up plays." Like, no, I think you need to draw up some plays. And I think he's a great coach, and I know he can do it.
Mm.
It's just a question of can they put something in there.
Yeah, well, listen, to be fair, I think he was just sort of remarking on the fact that his reputation coming into the league when he was an assistant at first was
fair, Will.
Yeah, you know what? You're right.
Fair.
You're right. He's already come on the program. I guess we could just disregard this
No,
now.
please.
No.
But I did take a quote out of context, basically.
Nah, it's
but,
all good. No. But I think, yeah, I mean, his reputation was like as an offensive coach. I remember like even the last season where when Casey won Coach of the Year, a lot of the credit to the Raptors was like, wow, they sort of like, revolutionized the offense. They were like really ISO heavy. Then they sort of played more team basketball, especially that second unit for the Raptors was really strong that year, really helped them propel themselves to almost 60 wins in the regular season. And of course, unfortunately, they didn't work in the playoffs and Dwayne got let go. But that year, a lot of the credit offensively went to Nick, who really was able to sort of like impart his schemes on the offensive end. Of course, then he became head coach and won the championship. So there's no complaints. But I mean, even thinking about that championship team, right? Like the role definition on that team was very clear. Kyle Lowry is your point guard. He's pass first. He's going to set guys up, look to get guys scoring. He was averaging like between 8 and 9 assists for most of that season. You have obviously Danny Green, who is like the most role-defined person I can even imagine in the NBA. Go to the corner. All right. Sometimes you cut baseline. With that Danny Green cut. Maybe switch ends of the floor, but mostly you're going to be shooting threes and obviously knowing your role. Kawhi is your classic star, right? You give him the ball, operate. You can obviously set him up as well, but you can basically do whatever you want offensively with Kawhi. But he was your star. Pascal was running out in transition. Scoring in the post. A lot of at that time, people were guarding him one-on-one, and so he was able to score his most efficient season, one most improved player. And then, you either had Serge or Marcus all in the middle, but those guys are pretty classic centers, right? Mark is even more adaptable because you can keep him out the three-point line, stretch it out a little bit, and let him move the ball. But guys had role definition on the team that when you think to like this version of the Raptors, I can't necessarily say which player is going to do what on a night-to-night basis. And so I think maybe there is some room for role definition, but I think, it's, to give the coaching staff a little bit of credit, like it's hard when guys are very ambitious. It's hard, like Fred's coming up on a new deal. I think probably for his perspective, he's already made the All-Star team, so he's probably less worried about it. But Pascal's trying to become a top 5 player. That's his sort of stated goal. Scottie's trying to build off the momentum of his rookie year to become an All-Star. Gary's coming up on a new deal. OG's already talked about, the reports were already out there that, he wanted to expand his role a little bit. It's sort of like who on the team is going to accept their specific roles that they do best and sort of allow sort of the distribution of shots to sort of be as optimized as possible. That's a real coaching challenge.
It's an extremely tough challenge. It's actually, this is probably going to be my more controversial take, and this is probably where people will get mad and demand I never be allowed on the radio again.
That's up to me and Alex. So
okay, well, I hopefully. So I just need to win you two over.
Yeah,
but that's why it wouldn't shock me if they find a new home for OG Anunoby.
Okay,
like it's not about whether he's good or whatnot or things like that. It's just you need to have some other piece on your team that's not 6'8" and not the same as everybody else. It's I don't know what I don't think they're actively looking to trade him or anything like that. This is just my thought of like if I'm building this team, I know I can get a ton for him and maybe I can put together more of that team that won the championship. More of that model somewhere in place because it feels like the model they have now is good. And I think this team's a top 6 team in the East. I think they're going to make the playoffs, not a play-in team.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that last year, and they vindicated me by making it. I think it's going to be the same thing again this year. I think they're slept on, but I think when it gets to the playoffs, that's where that just redundancy becomes a problem. And now that you have Scottie Barnes there, I almost feel like you have too much. And maybe it's time to explore a little bit of what can OG bring back for you, and can he kind of bring the roster, into that position where we do have roles set up, and it's closer to a thing where we can have a more competent and more consistent half court offense
Mm.
than we've had in the past. And I think that's kind of going to be something that I would keep an eye on. Maybe I'm crazy, but I just think it's something that I think it's somewhere in the weeds there where I can see that happening, and then that opens up so much more for them as a team offensively.
Mm. No, it's interesting, and I don't think it's out of bounds to discuss this at all,
Yeah,
because
but
it does.
you're not going to be in my mentions in 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That's Mo Dakil. Follow him on Twitter.
Underscore NBA.
Underscore NBA, of course. That's how you know you're a true hooper, when you have an underscore NBA. Like the Zach Lowe underscore NBA. So. Yeah, you got to have the underscore NBA. Mo, appreciate you. We ran out of time to talk about Eastern Conference tiers, but honestly, I think there's like 28 other podcasts who have done this. So
I've been on 30 of them, so yeah.
yeah, we'll talk about just more pure basketball stuff another time. But seriously, thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and yeah, we'll be calling you again soon. All right.
All right, thank you for having me.
All right, I think that's a good spot for us to take a break. I'm your host, William Lou. You've been listening to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. When we come back, Coach David Thorpe. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, William Liu. For the second segment, we'll be joined by David Thorpe of True Hoop shortly. But in the meantime, got to bring you behind the scenes a little bit. So last night, the Toronto Raptors, well, specifically Nick Nurse and part of the Nick Nurse Foundation, hosted a charity event, a night of music, and truly like music from all over the world. A lot of great performances. Shout out to CK. But the main event, and I have no idea how Nick pulled this off, and I would love to get to the bottom of this eventually, is he got Neo to come out to perform. And I know Alex is in the chat. I didn't know how much of a Neo stan Alex truly was, but my goodness, great performance. It was not your usual concert crowd, I would say. Obviously, it's not, 1,000 people jammed together, people crowd surfing, none of that kind of stuff. The very opposite, a lot of tables, people sort of bidding on charity items. And by the way, a lot of fantastic money raised for a fantastic cause, for the Nick Nurse Foundation. Some truly, truly wonderful items were put up for a charity auction there. Neo at the end of the night, I mean, just an incredible performance. I think if you check out Alex's Instagram page, I'm sure you'll find lots of it. But he was singing every word. I mean, so was I. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't realize how much of a performance Neil was gonna put on in that sort of environment. But he sort of spared no expense, and he gave us all the classics. And if my voice was a little bit sore, that's why I have this ginger tea, in front of me right now. It's just a great night. I think the nostalgia really hits you when you hear "So Sick" 20 years after it was released. It makes me want to get back on MSN Messenger and sort of right some old wrongs. But yeah, it was a great event. So I think my thing is just salute to Neo and salute to Nick Nurse and the charity night of music. What's going on, Derek? We got David Thorpe, so I can stop talking about Neo. Let's go, Coach David Thorpe of True Hoop, one of the best podcasts in the game, absolutely, and obviously one of the just the best minds on basketball that I've come across. So, Coach, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. And, Coach, I think this is becoming a meme at this point, but we always have to talk to you about Scottie and Pascal. I think this is just sort of like the lane that we picked for you. I think in the first half of the show, we were sort of discussing role definitions, sort of getting players to sort of buy into roles. This is if I'm the coach in this case, I guess this is the role we have for you. Is that all right with you, David?
I've been placed in many roles in my life. This is not the worst one, so I'm fine with it.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's start with so I think, look, the discussion I think for today's show is sort of just like trying to get the Raptors to the next step, because obviously they've established themselves as a playoff team. They had a competitive first round. Sort of how do you move forward from that? And I think the two guys that are being counted on to sort of make that next jump, to sort of make the Raptors take the next jump, are Scottie and Pascal. Let's start with Pascal. I think I wanted to get just a sense of what you made of last season, what he did in the playoffs as well, and just get a sense of sort of like, where is Pascal right now for you, whether that's sort of like as a top 15 player, whether that's as a top 20 player. I wanted to get your sense of sort of what you saw from him last season and sort of where he's sort of continuing on at the start of this one.
Yeah, I mean, he made all NBA and did not, first of all, he missed the beginning of the year with an injury, if I remember right. And it takes a while, and it took him a while to kind of find himself. And he's such a unique player. He's probably more like Giannis than anyone else in the league. And I'm not saying he's Giannis. There is no other Giannis, but he's of that ilk that defies description in some or label in some cases. He's someone that can literally, and I mean literally, play 1 through 5 like Giannis can. He just isn't as tall and maybe as powerful as Giannis, and that's why has not been an MVP candidate. Whereas Giannis has won some and clearly is one of the best players in the world. So it's pretty amazing to me that Pascal ended up having the season he had, given his start. Jason Tatum was in a similar situation where he struggled early to just make shots, but he wasn't coming off injury the way Pascal was. So I feel like going into this year, he has said he thinks he can take another step forward, which I give him a lot of credit for having that kind of belief in himself. and the expectation for himself, and knowing him a little bit, I know that he's an incredibly, he isn't afraid to work. In fact, I would argue he embraces that, where he just wants, if he's not working, he feels like he's failing, he's doing something wrong. That isn't so unique in the NBA. These guys tend to be that way, to
Mhm.
their detriment sometimes. But the good news is there is room for growth. It's not like he shot 43% from three last year and then also expects to be better this year.
Yeah.
That's an easy part of his game that he can grow. But I do want to add this: the context of this discussion, whether we talk Pascal, Scottie, or any individual player, has to be, you know, the collective improvement of the team. It does no good for either player, other than to their bank account, to improve individually if it doesn't also lift them collectively. And
Mhm.
I think that in the case of these two guys anyway, they think that way naturally. I think Pascal, while not the most vociferous leader, is certainly a team first. Just look at his numbers and look how willing he is to pass the ball, and 5 assists a game, whatever last year. Scottie certainly has always been that way, and that needs that's a challenging balance, guys. It's a challenge to try to improve your individual production as a scorer while also making sure that as a playmaker you're thinking about us and not just me all the time.
Mhm.
It's not easy,
Mhm.
and he's balanced it very well. And I think there's more for him to grow to do that. And now everyone can get better almost in the NBA. Very few guys really do once they hit his age, but it's possible. So now we'll see if he does it.
Yeah, and I think, my thought with Pascal is because his responsibility is so heavy on the offensive end. I mean, it's heavy on the defensive end as well. But I think because he has been described by Nick in preseason here as the Raptors' best scorer, I don't think that there's too much debate about that. And I think he's going to get the most touches and the most shots. My question is like, how can Pascal get more efficient, right? Because if you look at his true shooting percentages, there's one standout year at 63%. That was the year the Raptors won the championship. He was most improved player. I think there were sort of like different contextual things that happened that year in terms of obviously other guys were really commanding attention. And also, the scouting reports weren't really out on him at that point. He made that big jump, and that was fantastic. But the years after that, it's 55.5%, 54.7%, 56.5. These are strong true shooting percentages in terms of relative to league average. But I think for the best scorers in the league, you sort of see them in closer to that 60% range. And I think my question is sort of how do you get Pascal to be a little more efficient offensively?
Okay, how grainy do you want my answer to be?
Go ahead. This is essentially True Hoop Tuesday. So just as grainy as you would like, Coach.
Okay. So, well, I mean, listen, it isn't rocket science to know that getting more free throws and making more threes is the easiest answer of all. The free throw thing is probably the more interesting one from the standpoint of how you do it. So
Mm,
it's a combination of recognizing and valuing that, meaning I want to get fouled more. It isn't necessarily something players, wherever they grow up, is thinking about. In the case of people that I've worked with, and even going back into the '80s when I first started coaching, long before you guys were born, um, the very first book I ever read, when I got my first high school coaching job in the summer of '87, was Dean Smith's first book. He was the famous coach at Carolina at the
mhm,
time, and one of the winningest coaches ever. I think it was even in the introduction, not even on page one. He basically had some analytics. He wrote the book in the '60s, by the way, where he wrote about their number one goal on offense is to get fouled, because he wrote out the math.
mm.
The expectation for points produced per possession when you get to the free throw line that is just higher than anything else they could do. So, easily, obviously, if you could get a dunk every time, that'd be great. But the defense is not going to allow that. So you have to build your game plan out for that. It's a matter of, so why do you get fouled? You get fouled a number of ways. You get fouled because you can out quick your opponent and they have to grab you or somehow impede your progress illegally in the referee's eyes. You can overpower a player where he's got to use more physicality defensively than he otherwise normally would to be able to keep you from getting the shot you want, and that also would draw contact. You have to be a dominating scorer in the defender's mind so that he is quick to jump for a fake So that when you use a fake and that defender is thinking, I got to get up quickly or I'm going to be beat on this play, whether it's because the guy's stronger than me or quicker than me. And now that he's in the air, he's at your mercy. All right.
Right.
And then, of course, a lot has to do with where you're attacking at, not just from, because from is a big thing too. If you try to always attack from 30 feet, unless you're a Russell Westbrook in his prime, some of these all-time great free throw guys, you're going to have less success than if you attack more intelligently sometimes from close in. Like in Pascal's case, he's able to use quickness against bigs and use size and power against guards. So size and power against guards is not great if he's attacking from the perimeter. That's to their advantage. They're quicker than him to certain spots just because they're lower to the ground. It's just physics. Whereas if he's going against a bigger guy, it's probably smarter to face up and get space and make them cover more ground. And that's where you add change of speed and change direction. And so then the last part of this equation, I think for him, as I've studied him, is he has a natural feel for that extended length to finish at the rim off one leg.
Okay.
And the good news about that is you can get shots off frequently. The bad news is it's harder to make those shots when you're extending fully on the gallop to the rim. And then also you can't fake if you're going off one leg. The fake really has to come off a 2-foot landing where then you've got 5 seconds. And it's something I talk to players all the time. I'll ask them, how many 5-second counts have you gotten in your entire basketball playing career after you've picked up your dribble?
Yeah.
And I've never had an answer that was anything other than 0 or 1.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about some guys that are 30 years old. They've been playing since they were 10. And they realize that once they pick their dribble up, they're not in danger probably of getting a 5-second count. And yet they're afraid to do it. So they commit off one leg, and that prevents the opportunity to stick a landing off 2 feet and then pivot and fake, things like Jokic do. The real skilled players do. But anyone can do that. You have to value it. You have to practice it. You have to look forward to it. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not something Pascal really ever had to do, because for most of his life when he started playing, he was longer and quicker and more agile than his opponents. And even in the NBA, to some degree, he's the same. So if you factor all those things in, get more paint touches, whether it's by posting up or by attacking, using more fakes, changing speed and direction against bigger guys, all those things put defensive players at risk of getting beat, and that draws the foul. So just valuing that alone,
right?
I think it took 5-something free throws a game last year. That should be 8+.
Right.
Make 2 of those 3 extra ones, you're already at 24+ a game, I believe is where he's at. And he hasn't made a single extra 3 compared to last year.
Right.
He's already at 2 points. So to me, that's where I'd start if I was them. Not to mention what they can do X and O wise to get him more opportunities to get fouled. That's something he can do on his own.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the way you're describing almost is like a DeMar-esque sort of approach, right? I think DeMar, the way he's become more efficient is not necessarily by mastering the three-point shot, which is what everyone's sort of asking him for like a decade. He kind of resisted that, knowing that that's not his strength. Obviously, you can knock down the occasional catch and shoot corner 3 when he's open, when the ball swings to him, whatever. But he can get into that mid-range area, use those fakes. He's probably the best in the league at that. And that's a savviness to that aspect where you can operate in the mid range, you can operate, off the drive, not necessarily always getting to the rim, but still being efficient. And a guy like DeMar is a classic example, 8+ free throw attempts last season, and I think that's something for Pascal to aim for as well. I think shifting over to Scottie here, I really wanted to sort of ask 2 things, because the one thing that's coming up for me, just watching in preseason and sort of even thinking back on last year, is sort of like the moments when Scottie decides to sort of take over and the moments when he decides to be more of a passenger. And I think that part of that is, to me, he's a pass-first player. He thinks of himself as a point guard. He was very clear about that in even at media day today, or this past season, for example. But why is that? When you see a player sort of just like who has the potential to sort of control the game, who has the physicality and the skill to do so, why is it that certain players just don't always have the disposition to always be in attack mode?
So in a bubble a couple years ago, there was a player playing for a playoff team that was starting games passively. It was very obvious to me watching the games, and I could look at the stats quarter by quarter scoring. this player was just not looking to score. He was trying to get his teammates involved, knowing that he was going to be able to ramp up his scoring whenever they needed him later in the game. He was worried that I think that if his teammates weren't getting going, it wouldn't really matter what he was doing because they would be less likely to be successful late. That player's name is LeBron James, who's this year is going to go probably break the all-time scoring record.
Yeah.
So it's Chris Paul does it. Ben Simmons right now is doing it for probably different reasons, but Ben's going into games sometimes first, second quarter, not even looking at the rim, like just clearly trying to play 4-on-5 and hook up his teammates to the defense's delight, in my opinion. It's 5-on-5. It's one game of 5-on-5. And so some of our most gifted scorers who also recognize I've got to make sure I have teammates doing their thing and feeling in rhythm and comfortable. That's a positive. It's hard. I've argued this a lot. It's hard for really gifted passers to know when to shoot and when to pass possession after possession. Scottie certainly won't figure it out this year. He might figure out a percentage of what ultimately he needs to figure out. I've even noticed Chris Paul later in his career, and even late in his career, sometimes struggles with when, I can score at will. I think a couple years, maybe in the same, maybe 2 years ago against Milwaukee. When LeBron did it, was it 3 years ago it's 2 years, but 3 seasons in Disney bubble. When Chris Paul was in the finals, he was struggling as well sometimes to recognize nobody can guard me out there. I should just go score, because it's kind of embedded in them as the old point guard philosophy of quarterbacking the game. The quarterback manages the game. We've kind of outgrown that. We like our guards that can score. You guys have one in Freddie that can score. So it's 5-on-5 and not just 4 plus a passer versus 5. But yeah, I think Scottie, the other thing too is not just Scottie's own DNA. I think a big part of it too is he's still the youngest guy out there. OG clearly wants to score more. We know Trent wants to score more. Pascal's their best player. Freddie's an all-star. And I wouldn't say he's a shot first guy, but Freddie's very comfortable shooting the ball. He's not the most gifted passer. So for Scottie to be more assertive necessarily, I mean, it's a zero-sum game in terms of who's taking the shot in the possession. He did it more than most people thought he would as a rookie. When I picked him, when I said he'd be top 2 in the draft, I kind of figured he would be more assertive because that's the only way to get paid. But I don't think there's a switch that you flip where you suddenly figure it all out. It's going to take a long time, and we need to see progress this year, and then you and I can talk a year from now, and we'll say, okay, he's at 18 a game. How do you get to 24 or whatever? It's a process.
Yeah, and I think even for him, like, you'll notice patterns where maybe first quarter he's usually not looking to score all that much. I'm not gonna lie, but third quarter in particular for Scottie, it feels like that's where maybe he's felt out the rhythm of the game and understands sort of where he can pick his spots. And of course, I think that's when he might feel even more of a license to sort of score. But listen, I think that's what the fans want to see from him, and I think that's what the coach wants to see from him. I think the only thing I want to say about this, from my perspective, is just like, I think, I mean, this is also part of my own doing, so I'm not saying I'm not culpable, but we have to always discuss players within the context of their teams and not so much divorce players from their teams, because it ultimately is a team game, right? And even though there's expectations on different players because they have more abilities than other ones, ultimately it's a team game. I don't always want to divorce sort of Scottie as sort of his own expectations. He's got to score. I'm like, the Raptors got to win. That's the ultimate goal. And Scottie scoring more, I think, will be conducive towards that. I think the other thing too, Coach, I wanted to ask you is just, to me, even watching Scottie last season and watching him this year in preseason too, is just he seems more comfortable with the off the dribble long 2 than he does with a catch and shoot standstill 3. Sometimes you'll still see pretty erratic results where he'll catch the ball in the corner, his feet are set, he'll shoot it, and then it might be an air ball, or you just not really be that close. Whereas I think in the off the dribble long 2, which is I think objectively a harder shot, he seems to have a lot more comfort in both taking those, and the results look just naturally and more smoother. Can you sort of explain why that would be?
Well, having never met Scottie, I don't know what he's thinking, but my guess is he's got really big hands, and he's taken a million shots in his life dribbling first. That's kind of was his game growing up. And having never really been a shooter, like a lot of guys who can't really be guarded off the dribble, he has a lot fewer catch and shoots in his life. And those big old hands just struggle to get a good grip. Here's a great example. Do you ever play golf?
I don't play golf,
Okay, if
unfortunately.
you ever played or watch golf, you'll see
Mhm.
these professional. I mean, watch a PGA event, and you'll see these world's best golfers constantly gripping and re-gripping and re-gripping. The grip is everything
Hmm.
in golf. As soon as I learned to grip it, I could hit the ball. That was it. As soon as I did that, everything seemed to flow pretty easily. Um, and yet, it's not easy for them. They really do struggle to get that perfect grip. It's the same thing here, especially with those big hands that I'm guessing he has. He's just more comfortable feeling it, and it's just reps now. And I also it's probably I don't know who works with them. They should be valuing that feeling of when you catch. Some guys like to actually spin the ball in the catch and find the seams. I
Yeah.
don't know if he does that. I don't think he probably does. Maybe he should. He should not be in a rush to shoot just yet. That he's got a ways to go before he's got it. Once he learns to really shoot, which may never happen, but if it does, then you can start working on release, quicker release.
Right.
But yeah, I just think the side, there's a lot of surface area there
Hmm.
that he isn't necessarily getting his hands on the ball the right way.
Yeah. See, these are the technical things that I think for 99% of people who are following the Raptors, even following the basketball in general, like you don't think about that. But I think that's a fantastic point. This is why we bring you on so often, Coach. I think real quickly here, we only got 2 minutes, but I saw you put out a little tweet thread about sort of breakout candidates. And I know you named Tyrese Maxey, which I think is a great call. I think Raptor fans understand what Tyrese can do. He burned the Raptors in a lot of those games. I
Yeah.
think he was one of the big reasons why the Sixers got past the Raptors. But on the Raptor side of it, is there anyone that catches your eye real quickly in terms of just breakout candidates on the team?
I mean, we just talked about two really good players that could get much better. I'm curious about, well, Precious Achua is someone I liked a lot last year.
Mhm.
And I think he has a chance, which would be great for them. I don't think it's smart for them to play Pascal a lot at 5. It'll wear him down too much.
I agree.
I
Yeah.
also think they need help at point guard. That's a different story. Banton, though, could that be that answer? I don't know. I didn't really focus. You guys live for the Raptors. I follow 30 teams.
Yeah.
I
That's
didn't
fine.
really
If you don't
focus
have
on
the deep
Banton.
Delano Banton take, I totally understand.
Yeah, I do think he's got a shot. It would be
Yeah.
good. I know there's no time, but I was really curious. You asked me in a text you sent me, like what deal could they do to really improve their team? And I came up with one.
Oh, okay. Let's do it.
I want to get your opinion.
All right.
I was thinking, I don't know if this is good or not. I want your opinion. OG, this is the basic OG for Terry Rozier. Because you guys have no backup guard, you have no dynamic scorer that's under 6'9".
Yeah.
He is an unbelievable offensive player that used to be good on defense when he was on good teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could have a hell of if you want to finish games with Pascal at 5, that backcourt plus Gary at 3 and Scottie at 4 as a game-ending rotation would be interesting. And I think OG all year long is going to want to score more. He's only 25. Yeah. He fit in just fine with what they're trying to build in Charlotte because I wouldn't want to screw him.
Yeah. My only thing with that is I think the team would rather move him to shooting guard and look for a little bit more offense elsewhere rather than necessarily getting smaller and making a small backcourt with Rozier and Fred. But listen, Coach, I appreciate your time. I'm going to think about that some more because Rozier is a very talented scorer. And, yeah, we'll have you back on and we'll discuss the Raptors lots this season, all right?
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. That does it for us today. I'm your host, Will Lou. You've been listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. We're brought to you by Bet Rivers. It's a whole new game. Make sure you find The Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe. And please rate and review our show. A reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Thanks again to Mo DeKeel and David Thorpe. Thanks to board producer Derek Brandale and Jennifer Rolnick for helping us with the YouTube stream. And I'll be back tomorrow to talk more basketball.